Hi, my name's Rob Wall, and we're here again for another conversation in the midst of lockdown. And I have a great privilege today of being able to be joined by brilliant communicator, former pastor, Paul Scanlon. Paul, great to be with you. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Rob? I'm well. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing just getting used to lockdown. I've been told we've got another 3 weeks, so we're
Yeah,
not going
yeah,
anywhere.
that's not a great start to our interview. I was hoping it would be over soon, but I suspected. They always knew it would be longer. They were just going to tell us gradually.
Yeah, I know. I think a lot of people watching this conversation are going to be feeling pretty despondent about that news. And I think
Yeah,
the first 3 weeks of lockdown, I think the first week maybe it's a bit of novelty. Then we start to hit the reality of it. And now people are probably getting a little bit agitated. So my first question, Paul, is in the midst of this agitation, how do we make sure we lead ourselves well? And if we're leaders of other people, lead others well at the same time as wrestling with our own internal issues.
yeah. I think difficult times, conflict, tragedy that we've had through our lives, and nothing like this, I know, only brings out usually what's in us. It doesn't sort of suddenly create something in you that wasn't there prior to that. So I think everybody's doing in this situation whatever they were doing before with the new options coming on the table now. I think what's happening in the crisis that we're in now, Rob, is that people are bumping into themselves perhaps more than ever and have the opportunity to think, well, my coping skills actually are not that great. Or I did well week one, but week two it started to fall apart. And I think this is true for personally and corporately, organizationally. I think crisis brings out what's in us, and that is good, bad, and ugly right now for all of us, I suppose. And so I think people have to get real about that. It's a great chance to dig deeper and to discover some introversion habits because we are all forced into isolation. And to do some work on the inside of ourselves. So this for me has not been a big crisis because I am an introvert. So large aspects of this suit my personality. And so I've just used it to grow, to study, to think things through, to process things, to try and have a helpful voice into what's going on to a degree. But I was doing that anyway about everything in life. So this has not been different to me, but it will be very, very different for many, many people. I saw something posted, many of the things we've seen, our grandparents were asked to sit on the couch, were asked to go to war. We've been asked to sit on the couch. How hard can it be? But I thought that's not true because our grandparents were not who our parents are. Our grandparents were not career women to take our grandmothers. They were stay at home, nurturing, raise the kid mums. The dad went to work. So our grandmothers and our mothers now is not an apples and apples comparison. So I think comments like that are unfair to how difficult it is to us to be in lockdown when we're in a world where people are working, they are active, they are out doing jobs. They're not just at home sitting on a couch before this hit. They weren't doing that. They were working 3 jobs. They were busy. And so sitting on a couch sounds easy. It's not. If you're a lawyer, if you were a CEO, if you were a sales rep, if you were a whatever. So that adjustment is a massive meltdown or a massive flourishing opportunity.
And there seem to be 2 extremes that's being propagated from media platforms. First is production, and the other is consumption. So a lot of people are just consuming the fear and the negativity, etc., etc. And then there are those that are utilizing this time. How have you personally utilized this time, and what advice have you got to our viewers about how they can really be productive during this lockdown?
Well, again, I think difficulty, tragedy that strikes our lives personally or corporately, like the pandemic is doing now, I think there are 2 options. There is either stability or resilience. Stability means we weather the storm. Resilience means we get better because of the storm. And both of them are options. And I think both of them, we do something towards them both. Depends which way you lean and stay, determines the outcome following this. I think stability is the first reaction because we have lost our jobs and we've lost our security and all of that. And so there's a degree where we stabilize the ship. I get that. But stability is not a good strategy for long-term success and recovery. And I think we've got to move beyond stability, battening down the hatches, hoping we get through, to resilience, which begins to ask the question, what are the hidden opportunities in this crisis? Where can I grow as a person because of this, in spite of this, rather than sticking my head down, hoping it'll be over soon? Because as you said earlier, this lockdown is going to continue and the whole thing may go on for months yet. So I think eventually you have to come to a place of resilience. How can I grow? What can I give back? Who can I help? Where can I serve? Is a resilient response. It is not a stability response. And I think those are the two ways most of us are going at this time. Some are still going for stability, which means they're watching the news every day, keeping an eye on that, hoping it'll be over soon. When it's announced it won't be, it's a massive blow. They're going to a meltdown again. It's not good for long-term recovery and flourishing, isn't stability. It's good at the front end. It's not great as you continue to go through it. Resilience is better. Reinvention is better.
Does stability, to an extent, come from the systems that we adopt? Because James Clear says you don't rise and fall to the level of your goals, you rise and fall to the level of your systems. You have a whole leadership teaching around this, but how important is creating life-giving systems at the moment in our lives?
Yeah, I think it's important to have disciplines, habits, whatever you call them, that are your go-to behaviors, that if you didn't have them before this pandemic, you won't have them now. So again, a version of resilience in the pandemic would be that you discover now some daily routines that help you stay sane, help you keep active, give some variety to your day. And so again, that to me would be a resilience behavior, to find systems to help you to get through this if you didn't have them before. I think people that were highly systemized prior to this and had great daily habits of discipline prior to this will continue to do those, although they may have to do them in a different way, because you can't go to the gym, you can't be outdoors as much, you can't do whatever in the way you did. So again, resilience says, I will reinvent those systems in a different habitual form of behavior, but the basic infrastructure was already there. And I think it's good for life. And it's certainly good when life changes dramatically as it has now. Absolutely.
One system that I've seen a lot of communicators and leaders adopt is getting online, sharing a thought. You're obviously a fantastic communicator and love to hear about all that's going on with that a bit later on. But can you share some of your process and thinking when it comes to preparing let's just use the language of a message, whether it's 1 minute or 45 minutes? Just share a little bit about your process.
I'm not generally aware that I am preparing to speak a message. That's the first thing. Okay. I'm just studying for me. I'm growing me. And as I'm growing me and I'm learning, I'm thinking to myself, I think this would help other people. And that becomes the beginnings of the possibility of something I might pass on to someone else. I think I've said it different times in the masterclass. Maybe I said it when you came to the masterclass in Australia, that I study on average 100 hours I study for perhaps 1 hour of content I put out, which to be honest is too much. It's disproportionate, it's unnecessary. But I do it, I think, because in those 100 hours is a lot of stuff that's not for other people, it's for me. And so out of those 100 hours, I will condense it all down to something that I can give away, you know, in a podcast or in a message or something on social media. But it doesn't start with me looking for a message. I'm just looking for stuff that I think is going to help me grow and flourish. And I think some of this is going to be good to pass on. Now, some of it's going to be good to pass on later. And I do a separation often of, I think that's going to be good later. That needs to cook for a while. But I think this could be delivered sooner than later, because I think I'm clearer about saying that well now than I will be if I give something else more time. I think the other thing I do, Rob, and I think, again, great leaders and communicators do this, or whatever they call it, I work far more on my heart than I do on my material.
Wow. That's
so that I'm much more aware day in, day out. I'm much more trying to spend much more time in the shoes of the people I'm trying to help than in my head in trying to find something to say. I think a lot of communication, it's evident when you watch and listen, it's all about the content.
Yeah.
It's all about the song and the performance, to use a performing arts analogy. And I've been that version. I have done that as a communicator, as a public speaker, as a preacher. But for years now, for a couple of decades at least, I moved away from that to much more spending time in cultivating, developing just a good, healthy ecosystem. I spend much more time in that than I do in the material. So the material, the study, the content is secondary to that for me for the last 20 years, I think.
That's amazing insight. You, just to target one thing you said there, the 100 hours of reading and study and preparation, there must be an element of you having a great ability to say no to quite a lot of things to give you the freedom and space to achieve that. I won't quote it verbatim, but I know Tony Blair once said that one of the leader's greatest responsibilities is the ability to say no. And I just wanted to share a little bit about that. Have you found that to be true? Being able to say no has helped you to cultivate time to prepare?
Well, not only that, I think, I have a teaching called Simplify Your Life. And one of the 7 things about simplifying your life is, to simplify your life, you need to learn to say no. Because when you say yes to things you should have said no to, it creates artificial complexity that is self-induced. So every time you say yes but meant no, and then you're involved in something 2 weeks from now that 2 weeks earlier you said yes to, but when you said yes, you knew you didn't want to do it. So the more things you're involved in that you said yes to be polite, to fit in, to be popular, to appear friendly or loving or caring or whatever made you say yes, the more things you're involved in after that, it builds up this sense of internal resentment. But the resentment was self-induced because you have not learned to say no. And I think kids learn to say no from early on. It's one of the first words kids learn. But sociologists tell us, and I think it's true, the older you get, the harder no becomes to say, because no takes on social implications of you're rude, you don't care, you're not supportive, you're not interested, you're not loving, you're not kind, you weren't there for me. And so no becomes loaded with all of this social pressure. So that's another reason why we find it harder to say no as we age. And so I do think some people that are particularly wired to be people-pleasing by personality, they do really find it hard to say no. And so, yes, I think saying no is a good thing for all humans to get brilliant at. And the best book I read about that, by the way, I read a great book some years ago that I taught to our church, which was called The Power of a Positive No. And the book was about learning to say no really well, the belief being that the reason we can't say no is because no sounds so stark and rude. And the book was about ways to say no without ever using the word.
That's gold.
Which was brilliant, brilliant. And so I think people would find help with, well, I'm sorry, I'd love to. What's happening? I'm afraid, I'd love to be there, but I've got this. You've never used the no word yet, but you are saying no.
Yeah, gosh. Well,
so sometimes no is a skill. Yeah.
It's obviously a strategy that's worked for you, because obviously you pastored a great church in Bradford for many years. It grew. It's in great hands now. It's thriving. It thrived when you were there, and you're going literally across most, if not every continent, maybe not Antarctica, I don't know, but most continents, sharing what you've learned. How have you managed to build kind of a foundation and an infrastructure to carry the weight of kind of the pressure and responsibility of all eyes being on you, Paul? Because you get a lot of people coming to hear you preach, to your events, reading your blog, everything.
Yeah. I think all the habits that I've cultivated over my life obviously stand all of us in good stead. through our lives. Like I said about the pandemic, it will favor your habits, or it will not favor your lack of habits. And I think this is true for life. So the foundations I built in personal discipline of being healthy physically and mentally and emotionally, and aging well, which is a big teaching I did a couple of years ago, the commitment to age well, and so on and so on. I'm 63 now. I think all of these habits that I've built over my life obviously are my go-to foundations, my anchors, and everybody has their versions of that. So I have those definitely in the bank now. I think the other thing I'd say, Rob, is that I am unaware, to be honest, of influence. I'm unaware that doesn't weigh heavy on me. I'm unaware of a responsibility, a weighing of that on me. I know I have a voice. I know some people listen to what I do. Some people attend my events, but I don't see that in any way as a burden that I feel. I don't know why that is. I've never felt that. I think I've felt it could be here today and gone tomorrow.
Wow.
For whatever reason, like it just has with the pandemic. I think I've always held it lightly. I've always seen praise and criticism, and you're awesome and you're brilliant. I pay very little attention to that because I think all of that is overrated and it's ephemeral, it's fleeting, it's untrustworthy. So I've never found my ego attached to public speaking and all of that stuff. So I think I've got that a healthy place in me at this age and stage of life too, I think is true.
Is there a confidence, though, that comes with being adequately prepared like you clearly are?
Yes, for sure. And I think people that are unprepared do struggle with confidence, and confidence is complicated as to why you are or aren't, but certainly being underprepared will not assist your confidence for sure, yeah. But I think there's two kinds of preparation. Preparation of material, as I said, is one thing, but if you don't have a prepared heart, which is the thing you're doing all day, every day, you're preparing heart, again, I think there's a gap begins to occur then, so that your material's great, but you are absent as a person, and you are lacking authenticity in your delivery, and you have no connection with your audience because you have not worked on becoming a great human. You've just worked on great content, and that won't mask the fact that you're not flourishing as a person.
One of the ways that we will no doubt grow in character is when we're refined through pruning and failure and making mistakes. Well, one question I wanted to ask you is, in your career and ministry, there might be several, but is there one particular leadership decision that you didn't make, that you look back and that you wished you had made?
Yes, I think I wish I'd made the decision earlier to be a leader and not a pastor. I think the word pastor has been hijacked in the Western church, certainly, to be associated with shepherding, nurturing, care, feeding, which are primarily parenting, maternal, instinctive, looking after, taking care of people, I suppose, which hark back to the Victorian vicar era.
Yeah.
When the Victorian church was very feminine in its demograph, and so the vicar drinking tea with people. So, generations on, the pastors become almost the equivalent of that. Still, we're not shaking it off. And the truth is, pastors do not grow churches.
No.
Leaders grow churches.
Yeah.
So what we have around the world, and what I felt I had 15 years in, I woke up to this, but I still see it a lot around the world now, is we've got millions of leaders trapped in a pastor's identity.
So good.
And they're afraid to lead. And leading looks like one day, and this was for me, one day you have a controversial opinion about something, or one day you say something that goes against the grain, or you take on the church mafia, as I affectionately call them. So suddenly you start to lead, or you start to say no, or you fire someone, or you move someone in a space, like I mentioned earlier, to a different space, a different role, and then all hell breaks loose. Or in my case, bringing in the poor, and then all hell broke loose with the white middle class people who resented coming and sitting next to someone that they avoided socially. That was leadership. But
Yeah.
I realized when I started to lead, all hell broke loose. The temptation is then to dial that down, go back into the safety of just being a pastor. Because when I started to lead, people thought I needed a sabbatical or something.
And
And I wished I decided earlier to lead. Yeah.
and the way you transformed your church, remarkable. And that might be the answer to my next question. But what would be your measurement? What measurement will you use to determine your success at the end of your life? For you, what is success?
I don't think success to me is measured at all by anything external. At this age and stage of my life, I don't measure it by popularity, followers, support, interest, buy-in, whatever whatever those metrics are, and they matter. They're important to know. I get all of that, especially if you are in the corporate world. I get that. I think success at this age and stage of life to me is to do with, am I getting out what's in me? Am I fulfilling the reason I exist? Am I doing that? Am I being true to me? And I'm being true to what I'm here to do? I think that is the essence to me of success, because if it's measured then by, well, I'm only doing that if I have more of this and this and this, then success is an ever increasingly moving away from me target.
Wow.
And I think I've measured success differently in the past. And I think youth and inexperience and immaturity and ego measures it a different way. I think I've come to a point where my ego is not allowing me to answer that question anymore. I'm answering it from my heart, from my soul, which isn't attached to external markers to feel successful. In other words, if you measure Jesus's life, if you took a photograph of the cross, you'd have to conclude his life was an utter failure. And it's that I think we have to come to a point in our lives where we are comfortable with being perceived as an utter failure, because everything that is gone for success is not present for us. And so if I, God forbid, or any of us that are measuring success by external metrics, and this pandemic, by the way, is a big thing that's happening to external metrics. They're all gone.
Yeah.
So if your status, your identity, your success, your productivity, your sense of well-being and worth and welfare are attached to those external things, and now they're all gone, you're going to have a massive identity meltdown crisis, which is why people have often a very big midlife crisis, because a lot of the things that they felt mattered, they realize don't anymore. Or if you have a life-altering injury or an illness or something happens, or you go to jail and suddenly your life is changed and your success was based on metrics that you can't fulfill anymore, then who are you?
That's deep.
Kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. So what's the balance between, you mentioned making decisions with, or thinking with your heart, kind of a bit of an oxymoron, but like, what's the balance between leading with our heads and leading with our hearts? Because I think a lot of people, I read it somewhere, a lot of people are trying to make head decisions with their heart and wondering why they don't sustain the decision that they've made later on.
I think the difference to me, neurologically, biologically, psychologically, is the head is more attached to the ego and the heart is more coming from the soul. So the mind is completely tied up with an egoic identity, which begins before we're born and after we're born, with multiple labeling that we have attached to us as humans. These external labels of gender, skin color, nationality, lifestyle, sexuality, politics, religion, all of these labels give you a version of you that is not you. So if you don't have the name you have and the skin color you have and the nationality you have and the job you have, are you still you? Yes, of course you are. But because you don't know who that is, you never figure out who that is. So living in your head is much safer socially than stepping away from that identity, much of which is false, stepping away from role identity, gender, nationality, skin, politics, religion, culture, identity, It's much safer to stay in that social construct, because then I can give you answers to questions you ask me. Who are you? What do you do? Where you're from? Then we've got a conversation going. But to live from the soul, which is the essence of who we are as humans, means that you are automatically already relating with deep, clear, raw authenticity, which means that you're already automatically going to be fluent in human, which gives you a massive connection with other humans, different to you, rather than only connecting with other humans who are like you, who share a similar egoic identity, is head stuff. So to me, to live from the heart is to uncouple from the ego. This is why Jesus said, there's a life to lose before there's one you can gain.
Yeah.
And he said, what's the point in gaining the whole world, which is what the ego wants to do, and lose your soul? Because your soul isn't trying to gain anything. It just is. So I think it's that. But the problem for us, and I speak about this a lot in my online video course about prosperity of the soul, living from the soul, much more than living from your personality, which is ego driven. I think it's all of that. It's a long answer to a short question, but I do think it's complicated, and it's worthy of a complicated answer.
So ego is the enemy, as the famous Ron.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, fine.
It definitely is.
In a moment, Paul,
yes.
In a moment, I'd love to hear how we can find out more about you, how we can get your resources, where you're at. But if you were to sit down, if our viewers could sit down for a coffee one-to-one with you, and you could give them, over the course of maybe an hour, one piece of advice, what would it be? And why would you choose that piece of advice?
Well, I'd say, first of all, be careful taking any advice from a stranger in your home that called in for coffee. Number one. Number two, I would say, I think of all the things I would say to me, if I went back to a younger version of me, I would say to myself, Paul, as soon as you can, be yourself. And that is really a fundamental part of my message to all humans now, is be you. In other words, start early on deconstructing, unlearning, stepping away from everyone else's version of you. Abandon that, get free from that, shed those skins, and be you, which means you have to develop the superpower called self-awareness. And I think in the church world, we demonize self-awareness, and we've not encouraged people to be themselves. And so especially to believers, to Christians, I think we especially have a lot of work to do to get off the religious egoic identity layer, because we have our own versions on top of the others, and be yourself. I'd say to people, be you. And that's why I've talked about living from the soul, because if you don't find out what your soul loves and give it more, you will live unhappy. Because the essential person who you are, you've got to feed that person. And what the ego does is it feeds a false identity, and your soul's languishing. That's what Jesus meant about, you get all this stuff, but then you don't know who you are. You're unhappy as a person. So you've got everything you ever wanted, but you're unhappy. So I would say to people, be yourself. Here's what I mean about that.
Brilliant. Gosh. How do we find out more about you, Paul? Where do we find you teaching? What's going on over the next few months? And where can we get some resources and content?
Yeah, thank you. Well, paulscanlon.com, you guys, is my website. And Paul Scanlon UK is my social media address. All of my stuff now is online. I'm very excited that in about 2 weeks' time, Rob, and for your viewers, I don't know when this goes out, but I am about to launch early May. My communication masterclass comes out as an online video course, and it will be available online.
Amazing.
I've done this 10 years only ever live around the world. No one knows the content apart from those that have been. I never wrote it. It was never online. And I sat down and recorded it to camera recently in Australia. I'm very, very happy. It's the best version I've ever given, because I knew it's maybe one of the last times I'll ever speak about it live. So I'm very thrilled that that's coming out. So if people feel at all that they have a calling or vocation to be a communicator, say a thing well, I think they're going to love the communication masterclass resource, and lots of stuff there at paulscanlon.com.
Amazing. And guys, this is all going to appear in the lower third. Just you can see it now. So do pay attention to that. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I hope you continue to stay safe and sane in lockdown.
Yes, I wish you the same and all the viewers the same. Blessings to you all. Stay safe, stay well, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. All the best.
Cheers, Rob. Thank you.